In this video, we are going to create the death animations for each of our enemies. And before we begin, real quickly, you might be getting this error that says, not an error, but a warning that says parameter in combat does not exist. That's coming from our spider. And that's because we're not using that logic, and it's coming from our update method of our parent. In order to fix that, we just need to override the update method so that it gets called from ours. So here, what we're going to say is simply inside spider, just public void or public override void. We need to override the parent update, void update, and remove the base.update. Just save that, have it be an empty function, and that will get rid of this warning. So the first thing we need to do in order to set up all of these death animations is we need to slice them up. So let's go ahead and open up our sprites, our characters, go into our moss giant first. Inside the moss giant, we have our death animation. We need to slice this up. So let's go ahead and make this 512 pixels per unit, change the sprite mode to multiple, open up the sprite editor, hit apply, and let's slice this up by grid size. Make this 512 by 512. Make sure each box is its own, hit apply. When it becomes grayed out, we can X out of this, and then we can create the attack animation. Let's select our moss giant enemy, go into the sprite, open up the animation panel. We're going to create a new animation called death. So here is going to be death. We're going to save this under sprites, characters, moss giant, animations, and we'll save it with the others. Once you've done that, select frame 0 through 15, drag it in, and you can focus in on this sprite by selecting the moss giant enemy sprite. Hit F in the scene view to focus in on it, and we can visualize the behavior. For this, we want to set the sample rate to about 15. So let's go ahead and say that's about 15, maybe 20 frames per second. And we have that nice fall. Now, one thing we don't want to do is have this loop. So once we have that animation set, let's go to the folder where we saved it, select the death animation, and select loop time to false. That way it should freeze on the last frame. Okay. Now that we have that, we can do our skeleton next. So hop into your skeletons folder, and we have the skeleton death animation. So let's change this to sprite mode multiple. Let's open up the sprite editor, hit apply. All right, and we'll slice this by 512 by 512. All right, and that is too big for the skeleton here. So let's do a 128 by 128. And that is too small, so 256 by 256. All right, and there we go. Hit apply. Once that's finished, close this. Make sure you set the pixels per unit to 256. Select apply. And we can create that new animation. Let's select the skeleton enemy parent, the sprite, go to the animations, idle, and we're going to create a new clip, call it death. And we'll go to sprites, characters, skeleton, animations, and we'll save it with the others. Once we've done that, we can then drag frame 0 through 46 into the animation here. Let's set it to about 30 samples. All right, and we can go ahead and play that and see how it looks. And that looks pretty good at 30 frames. All right, let's save our scene. The next thing we want to do, just like the other, is select that animation where you saved it, the death animation, select loop time to 0. We do not want to loop this. Okay, last but not least, we have our spider and our player. So let's do our spider here, spider death. Let's go ahead and change this to a 512. I believe it's 512 by 512. All right, we will slice this up. Make sure your sprite mode is multiple. Go into the editor, hit apply. We'll slice by grid size, and I'm sorry, it's going to be 256 by 256. Yes, 256 by 256, hit apply. Change your pixels per unit to be 256. Hit apply down here. And we're going to do the same process. Select the sprite of the enemy spider, create a new animation, call it death, and we're going to save it with our spider animations. Once you've done that, select frame 0 through 30, drag it in, set the frame rate to about 30, and let's go ahead and sample that. Let's go ahead and move over here. All right, and that's our death animation. So we might want to slow it down a bit, maybe 20 frames per second. And I'd say that looks much better. All right. Save your scene. Select your animations folder where you just saved that animation. And make sure loop time is set to false. Now, last but not least, let's do our player. So inside the player here, we have our death animation. All right, and we may have already done this previously. We did not. So let's create our death animation here. So make sure your sprite multiple sprites. And we slice by 256 by 256. Set pixels per unit to 256. Let's select our player sprite. Create a new animation. Call it death. And we'll save it with our sprites, characters, player, animations. Once we've done that, we'll take frames 0 through 34, place them in the animation view, set the animation speed to about 30 frames per second. Let's go ahead and find our player here, and let's see how this looks. All right, and you'll notice here it's a little small, and that could be affected by the pixels per unit, most likely. So what I want to do here is change that back to 100 just for the player. And there we go. That's going to bring him back. I believe the reason for that is because we are actually adjusting the scale possibly. So let's go ahead and check out the sprite. Let's go to our death animation here at 30 frames. And that looks good. So one of the things I noticed here is if you look at our death, idle, attack, as soon as you go into death, or let's go into our attack animation here, his feet are planted, but if I play the death animation here, he rises a bit. Now the reason for that could be because if we look here, we didn't cut this properly. It's not spliced, it's spliced unevenly. You can see here that the sprite itself is like moving based on the size. So let's readjust this. Let's go ahead and revert this back. So for this death animation here, it's multiple. Let's slice this by 256. There we go. 256 by 256. Hit apply. And there we go. That's much better. Now we actually should be able to say pixels per unit is 256 and not have to worry. And it does get small. So change that back to 100. Ideally, we do want pixels per unit to always be what it is that you're splicing it by, but for this instance, to keep him consistent with the others, we're going to keep it at 100. So here we have our attack here, and then here we go to death, and there we go. Now he's not rising. So here we can play it, and we have our death animation. Perfect. Now that we have our death animation set up, we can then begin setting up the transitions and triggering it all through code. We'll do that in the next video.